They say never go to war with a man who buys ink by the barrel, but I'd add a modern amendment to that. Never go to war over property lines with a man who wrote the maps. It started with a generic certified letter and a demand to tear down a fence that had stood for 20 years. The HOA president thought she was enforcing the rules, but she was actually stepping onto a legal landmine. If you appreciate stories where the quiet guy uses a surveyor's transit level like a sniper rifle, you're in the right place. Let's unravel how this unfolds. The sound of the mail truck was the only thing that marked the passage of time on Tuesdays in Oak Ridge Meadows. Arthur Pendleton sat on his front porch, a mug of black coffee resting on the knee of his beige canvas work pants. He watched the white Grumman LLV sputter to a stop at the curb. The carrier, a young man named David, who usually waved, didn't wave today. He walked up the driveway with a scanner in his hand and a rigid pink slip of paper fluttering in the breeze. "Certified mail, Mr. Pendleton," David said, looking almost apologetic. "Need a signature." Arthur didn't frown. He didn't sigh. He simply set his coffee down on the railing, took the stylus, and signed his name in the precise block letter drafting script he had perfected over 40 years as a civil surveyor. "Thanks, David." "Looks like it's from the association office," David muttered, handing over the heavy envelope. "They've been busy this week." Arthur waited until the truck rumbled away before sliding his thumb under the flap. He didn't rip it. He sliced it open cleanly. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, embossed with the Oak Ridge Meadows tree logo. "Notice of violation, Class A encroachment." He adjusted his glasses. The letter was signed by Brenda Miller, the new HOA president, who had been elected on a platform of restoring neighborhood excellence. "Dear homeowner, it has come to the board's attention during a recent beautification audit that your cedar perimeter fence, located on the north elevation of your lot, extends approximately 36 inches beyond your deeded property line and into the common area greenbelt. This constitutes a theft of community property and a violation of Article 4, Section 2 of the CC&Rs. Remedy, you must remove the encroaching structure and restore the sod at your own expense within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of $100 and potential legal action to recover the land." Arthur lowered the paper. He looked to his left, where the cedar fence ran in a perfect, straight line toward the back of the lot. He had built that fence 22 years ago. He hadn't just dug holes. He had located the iron pins buried 18 inches underground. He had pulled the county plat maps. He had accounted for the magnetic declination. That fence was exactly 2 inches inside his property line, leaving a courtesy strip so he wouldn't have to step on HOA grass to paint the pun. Wood. He looked across the street. Brenda lived 3 houses down. Her blinds were twitching. She was watching. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. Most people would panic. They would call a lawyer immediately, or worse, run over to Brenda's house screaming about rights. Arthur felt a strange, cold calm wash over him. It was the feeling of a man who knows that the bridge he built will hold, and the person trying to burn it down is standing on the wrong side of the ravine. He stood up, folded the letter along its original crease, and placed it in his breast pocket. He walked into his house, past the living room, and into the study that smelled of old paper and graphite. He unlocked the large fireproof filing cabinet in the corner. His fingers walked over the tabs until they stopped at a thick, hanging folder labeled Lot 44, Survey and Origins, 1998. "Brenda," he whispered to the empty room, pulling out a large blue-line map, "you really should have checked the iron pins." Arthur did not go to the window when the pony started barking 3 days later. He didn't need to. He simply swiveled his drafting chair toward the bank of 3 monitors set up on his auxiliary desk. The monitor on the left displayed the feed from the 4K wide-angle camera mounted continuously under the eaves of his garage. On the screen, a small crusade had assembled on his driveway. Leading the charge was Brenda, wearing a visor and wielding a clipboard like a shield. Flanking her was Jerry, the HOA treasurer who always looked nervous, and a younger man Arthur didn't recognize, holding a bright orange landscaping wheel, the kind used by gardeners, not surveyors. Arthur leaned in, adjusting the contrast on the screen. "Amateurs," he muttered. He watched as they walked to the edge of the street. The younger man placed the wheel against the concrete curb. Arthur flinched. It was a rookie mistake so profound, it was almost painful to watch. They were measuring from the back of the curb, assuming the concrete infrastructure was the immutable baseline of the subdivision. Arthur knew for a fact that the curb had settled 3 inches south since 1998, and more importantly, the legal property line actually began 2 feet behind the sidewalk, a detail buried in the municipal right-of-way statutes. Brenda pointed a finger at Arthur's fence. The young man began walking the wheel across the grass, the plastic device clicking audibly even through the camera's microphone. They marched right up to his hydrangea bushes. "Stop there," Brenda's voice came through the audio feed, tinny but clear. "That's 15 feet from the curb. The bylaws state a 20-foot setback." "It says 20 feet from the property line, Brenda," Arthur said to the empty room. "Not the curb." Then Brenda did something that made Arthur sit up straight. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a can of inverted marking paint, neon orangey. "We need to mark the violation clearly so the contractor knows what to rip out," she declared. Jerry looked uneasy. "Brenda, maybe we should knock first. Paint is pretty permanent." "It's water-based, Jerry, and it's not his property. It's the HOA's land he's squatting on." She shook the can. The ball bearing rattled, a sound of impending war. She bent down and sprayed a jagged, aggressive line right through the center of Arthur's manicured zoysia grass, slicing through the mulch bed of his hydrangeas and ending abruptly at the base of his cedar fence. Arthur's hand hovered over the phone. The urge to storm out there and demand they get off his land was visceral. It was the instinct of a homeowner protecting his castle. But the surveyor in him, the man who knew that documentation beats emotion every time, stayed his hand. If he went out there now, it was just a neighborly dispute. He would yell, they would yell, and they would leave feeling righteous. But if he let them finish, if he let them document their own destruction of his property based on false data, he wasn't just dealing with a noise complaint anymore. He was dealing with criminal trespass and malicious destruction of property. He watched Brenda step back to admire her work. The orange gash looked violent against the deep green grass. She took a photo of it with her phone. "Perfect," she said. "Send him the fine for the paint, too. Maintenance costs." Arthur clicked the mouse. Save clip. Timestamp, 10:14 a.m. Back up to cloud. He opened a new file on his computer. He titled it Exhibit B, Unauthorized Survey, Survey and Vandalism. As the trio retreated down the driveway, self-satisfied and chatting about the improvement of the neighborhood, Arthur finally stood up. He walked to the window and looked at the neon scar on his lawn. It was ugly, but to Arthur it looked like something else. It looked like a signature on a confession. The Oak Ridge Meadows Community Center smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a sterile, windowless room filled with 40 folding metal chairs, only 6 of which were occupied. Arthur sat in the back row, his posture rigid, his hands resting on a leather-bound notebook. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the board of directors. Brenda sat in the center, elevated slightly by a thicker cushion she had brought from home. She was currently lecturing Mrs. Gable, a widow from Lot 12, about the unauthorized shade of beige on her mailbox. Arthur waited. He watched the clock on the wall tick past 7:45 p.m. "New business?" Brenda asked, looking over her reading glasses. Her eyes landed on Arthur, and a thin, patronizing smile touched her lips. "Mr. Pendleton, I assume you're here about the encroachment notice. I hope you're here to tell us you've scheduled the removal." Arthur stood up. He didn't approach the table. He stayed by his chair, his voice calm and carrying easily across the empty space. "I am here to clarify the board's position before I take action," Arthur said. "For the official record." Brenda sighed, glancing at the secretary, a young woman named Sarah, who was furiously typing on a laptop. "Go ahead, Arthur. Make it quick." "The notice of violation I received cites a determination of property boundaries," Arthur stated, reading from his notes. "I am requesting a copy of the licensed survey the board commissioned to make this determination. As you know, under state law, only a licensed surveyor can legally locate a property line for the purpose of forced removal." Brenda laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. "Arthur, we don't need to spend thousands of dollars on a surveyor to see what is right in front of our eyes. We have the county maps." So, there is no physical survey? Arthur pressed. You are relying solely on the county GIS data? We are relying on the official county tax assessor's database, Brenda snapped, her patience thinning. She shuffled through a stack of papers and pulled out a color printout. She waved it in the air. It's right here. The satellite overlay clearly shows your fence is over the line. Unless you think the satellites are lying. Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline, but his face remained impassive. This was the moment. May I see that document? Brenda rolled her eyes but gestured for him to approach. Arthur walked to the table and took the paper. It was exactly what he expected, a low-resolution printout from the county's public web portal. The property lines were superimposed red vectors over a grainy satellite image. At the very bottom of the page, in fine print that Brenda had clearly ignored, was the standard disclaimer. This map is for tax assessment purposes only and does not represent a legal boundary survey. Arthur looked up at Sarah, the secretary. Sarah, please ensure the minutes reflect that President Millen has identified this specific document, the county GIS printout, as the sole basis for the violation notice. We aren't playing court here, Arthur, Jerry, the treasurer, grumbled. I just want to be clear, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming very serious. The board is officially stating that this printout is superior to the physical iron monuments buried on the property? Yes, Arthur, Brenda said, enunciating every syllable like she was speaking to a child. The map shows you are stealing land. Now sit down or leave. You have 26 days left. Arthur nodded. Thank you. That is all I needed. He didn't give the paper back. He folded it neatly and slid it into his notebook. Hey, I need that back for the file, Brenda called out. It's a public record now, Arthur said, turning toward the exit. I'll make you a copy. As he walked out into the cool evening air, Arthur felt the weight of the notebook in his hand. It wasn't just paper anymore. Brenda had just admitted on the record to making a legal determination without a professional license, using a document that explicitly stated it couldn't be used, but for that purpose. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had acted with gross negligence. He got into his truck and sat in the silence for a moment. The engine turned over with a reliable hum. He didn't go straight home. Instead, he turned left, heading toward the highway. It was time to visit the storage unit where he kept the rest of his gear. The total station was calibrated, but he needed the heavy artillery now, the magnetic locator to find the deep iron, and the shovel. Brenda wanted to talk about lines. He was about to show her lines that hadn't seen the sun since 1980. The garage door opened at 5:15 a.m., the chain drive rattling loudly enough to wake the birds, but hopefully not the neighbors. Arthur didn't care if they heard him. He needed the light of the rising sun for the prism. He stood before his workbench, a sanctuary of organized steel and grease. In the center sat the hard-shell orange case he hadn't opened since his retirement party. He undid the latches with a satisfying snap. Inside, nestled in custom-molded foam, lay the Leica Total Station, a $30,000 instrument capable of measuring distances to the millimeter from a mile away. It was a weapon of truth in a world of estimates. He lifted the heavy unit, feeling the familiar weight in his forearms. He checked the optical plummet and wiped a speck of dust from the objective lens with a microfiber cloth. Time to go to work, he whispered. For the next 3 days, Arthur became a fixture in the neighborhood. He wore his neon yellow safety vest, not out of compliance but out of professional habit. To the untrained eye, he looked like a confused old man staring through a telescope. To anyone who knew civil engineering, he was conducting a forensic audit of the earth. He started at the back corner of his lot. He swept the Schoenstedt magnetic locator over the ground. The device emitted a low hum, then spiked into a high-pitched scream. Ping. Arthur dug, 6 inches down, through the thatch and clay. His trowel hit metal. He brushed away the dirt to reveal the rusted top of a number 4 rebar rod with a yellow plastic cap stamped RLS 4921, the original corner monument set in 1988. He set the prism pole on the center of the rod and looked through the total station. 0.0, he noted in his field book. His fence post was exactly 2 inches inside the line, just as he had built it. But Arthur didn't stop there. If Brenda was seeing a 3-foot encroachment on the map, that meant the map was shifted 3 feet. He needed to find the source of the drift. He moved his operation out to the street. He walked to the intersection of Oak Ridge Drive and Pine Court, the main entrance to the subdivision. He located the primary subdivision control monument, a brass disc set in concrete. He shot the coordinates. Then he moved to the fire hydrant on the west boundary. By the afternoon of the third day, the sweat was soaking through his vest, but the numbers in his notebook were telling a story that made his heart race. He sat on the curb, entering the raw data into his laptop. He triangulated the points. The math was undeniable. The physical iron pins, the legal reality of the neighborhood, were all in their correct places. However, when he overlaid the county's digital GIS layer, he saw the problem. The entire digital map of the subdivision was shifted south-southeast by exactly 3.2 feet. Arthur leaned back, wiping his forehead. He knew how this happened. It was a datum conversion error. Years ago, when the county digitized the old paper maps, someone had calibrated the starting point incorrectly. It was a ghost error, existing only on computer screens, totally detached from the physical ground. Brenda wasn't looking at the land, she was looking at a glitch. But then Arthur saw something else. He zoomed out on his laptop screen, following the 3.2-foot shift across the virtual neighborhood. If the map was shifted south, that meant the digital property lines were pushed north. His eyes widened. He scrolled over to the community common area, specifically the plot where the HOA had built their new clubhouse and pool 5 years ago. He ran the calculation again. He checked the setbacks. My God, Arthur breathed. Because of the shift, the HOA had laid out the pool deck based on the physical pins, but they had filed the permits based on the digital map. Or was it the other way around? He checked the permit filings he had downloaded. They had used a cheap contractor who used the digital map to stake the foundation. Arthur stood up and looked down the street toward the sparkling blue water of the community pool. The pool wasn't just in the wrong place. By the strict geometry of the law, the deep end of the community pool was currently sitting inside the easement of the high-voltage transformer box, and the clubhouse patio was encroaching on the protected wetlands buffer. Brenda wanted to enforce the lines. Arthur closed his laptop with a sharp click. He was going to give her every single line she asked for. Day 29 arrived with a humidity that made the air feel heavy and suffocating. The morning mail brought the escalation Arthur had anticipated. This time, the envelope wasn't from the HOA office. It was from Holloway and Associates, attorneys at law. Arthur read the letter at his kitchen counter. It was standard intimidation boilerplate. They cited the continued noncompliance and notified him of their intent to file a lien against his property for legal fees, fines totaling $3,000, and the cost of remediation. They were threatening to take his equity to pay for their mistake. He filed the letter in the folder now marked Exhibit C, Harassment and Extortion. At 1:00 p.m., a white pickup truck with a rusted tailgate rumbled up the driveway. A magnetic sign on the door read, Dave's Hauling and Demo. 2 men stepped out, looking tired and indifferent. One carried a heavy sledgehammer. The other held a reciprocating saw. Arthur watched them from the garage. He didn't wait for them to ring the bell. He hit the button for the garage door, and it rose slowly, revealing him standing there. He wasn't holding a weapon, just a clipboard. The driver, presumably Dave, looked up, startled by the sudden appearance of the homeowner. Help you? Arthur asked. His voice was flat, devoid of fear. Work order from the HOA, Dave said, thumbing toward the house down the street. Ms. Miller said to take down the cedar fence on the north side. Said you were notified. I was notified of her opinion, Arthur said. He walked down the driveway, crossing the invisible line where the public street ended and his property began. He stopped 5 feet from the contractor. But you need to see this before you unload any tools. Arthur handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a formal notice of forbidden trespass and assumption of liability. What's this? Dave asked, squinting at the dense text. That is a legal notification, Arthur explained, his tone helpful but steely. It informs you that the boundary line is currently under dispute and subject to active litigation. It states that if you or your employees step 1 inch onto my land, which begins 2 feet behind that sidewalk, I will have you arrested for criminal trespass. Furthermore, if you damage any structure on the property, I will sue your company personally for the replacement cost, plus damages. Dave looked at the fence, then back at Arthur. He looked at the sledgehammer in his hand, which suddenly seemed very heavy. Lady Miller said it was common area, Dave said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. She said she has the maps. She has a printout from a website for her. Arthur corrected, I have a Class A certified survey sealed by a licensed professional engineer within the last 48 hours. The iron pins are visible. Arthur pointed to the small orange flag he had placed by the buried rod. If you cross that flag, you are breaking the law. Does your liability insurance cover willful destruction of private property during a civil dispute? Dave paled. He knew the answer. Insurance covered accidents, not intentional acts ordered by a third party. I'm not getting in the middle of a lawsuit for $500, Dave muttered. He turned to his partner. Load it up, we're leaving. Wait! The shriek came from the sidewalk. Brenda was power walking toward them, her face flushed with indignation. She waved her phone in the air. Where are you going? She demanded, ignoring Arthur entirely. I hired you to do it. That fence comes down today. Dave climbed into the driver's seat and slammed the door. He rolled down the window just enough to shout back. Sort it out with him, lady. He says he's got a survey. I ain't losing my license over a fence dispute. The truck reversed aggressively out of the driveway and sped off, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the humid air. Brenda stood alone, on the sidewalk, vibrating with rage. She turned her glare onto Arthur. You think you're clever, she hissed. You think scaring off a handyman changes the rules? The annual assembly is tomorrow night. I'm going to motion for a foreclosure vote. We will take your house, Arthur. Arthur looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He looked at her with the pity one might feel for a person standing on train tracks who refuses to turn around to see the locomotive. Yes, Brenda, Arthur said softly. See you at the assembly. He turned and walked back into his garage, hitting the button. As the door lowered, shutting out the sight of her, he felt the final piece of his strategy click into place. She was fully committed now. She had doubled down. There was no way for her to claim ignorance later. He went back to his study and printed the final overlay map. It was time to show the neighborhood in exactly where the lines were drawn. The morning of the annual assembly broke with a gray, steel-colored sky. At 5:30 a.m., while the streetlights were still humming, Arthur parked his truck in the empty lot of the Oak Ridge Meadows Community Center. He wasn't there to swim. He walked to the edge of the pool deck, his boots making a hollow thud against the stamped concrete. The water was still, reflecting the dark tree line behind it. This tree line was the green belt Brenda was so obsessed with protecting from Arthur's fence. Arthur knelt down at the edge of the patio. He hooked the end of his tape measure onto the chain-link fence that separated the pool area from the woods. He walked the tape back toward the pool house foundation. 12 feet, he whispered. He retracted the tape and pulled a thick, yellowed document from his jacket pocket. It was a certified copy of the 1982 Master Declaration of Covenants and Restrictions, specifically Appendix C, Environmental Easements. He turned on his flashlight and traced the legal description with his finger. A perpetual, non-disturbing conservation easement shall be maintained for a distance of 50 feet from the delineated wetlands boundary. No impervious surface, permanent structure, or foundation shall be constructed within this zone. Arthur looked at the pool house. It was a beautiful structure, renovated just 5 years ago under the previous board, using the funds from a special assessment on the home owners. Brenda had been the head of the beautification committee back then. She had championed the project. Because of the 3.2-foot map shift error, the digital records showed the pool house was 51 feet from the wetlands, safe by a single foot. But in reality, on the physical earth Arthur was standing on, the shift meant the wetlands line was actually closer. He did the math in his head. The map shift moved the legal line south. That meant the protected zone moved south. The pool house wasn't 51 feet away. It was 47 feet away. It was inside the federal buffer. This wasn't just an HOA violation. This was a violation of the Clean Water Act. If the county found out, they wouldn't just fine the HOA, they would mandate the demolition of the pool house to restore the permeable surface. Arthur stood up, feeling the immense weight of the leverage he now held. Brenda was trying to fine him for 3 feet of grass. In doing so, she had forced him to prove that the entire community center was an illegal structure. He took a series of high-resolution photos of the tape measure against the foundation, capturing the undeniable reality of the distance. He returned home as the neighborhood began to wake up. He went straight to his study. The time for observation was over. It was time for production. He spent the next 6 hours assembling the packages. He didn't just staple papers together, he bound them. He created 20 copies of a document he titled The State of the Survey, a forensic analysis of Oak Ridge Meadows. Inside each packet were the copies of his certified survey, the 1982 easement, the photos of the pool, and the superimposed maps showing the catastrophic shift. He placed the master copy in a leather presentation folder. At 6:00 p.m., he showered and shaved. He put on his charcoal suit, the one he used to wear to court when he served as an expert witness in boundary disputes. He tied his tie with a precise, symmetrical knot. He looked in the mirror. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a prosecutor. "Don't start a fight you can't finish, Brenda," he said to his reflection. He picked up the box of documents and walked out the door. The assembly started in 30 minutes. The Oak Ridge Meadows Community Center was no longer empty. Every metal folding chair was occupied, and residents lined the back walls, standing shoulder to shoulder. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat of 100 homeowners. Brenda stood at the podium, bathed in the harsh light of the projector. Behind her, a PowerPoint slide displayed a blown-up, pixelated photo of Arthur's fence with the words, "Community Threat, Lot 44" in bold red letters. "It is not just about a fence," Brenda declared, her voice amplified by the microphone. "It is about the integrity of our borders. If we allow Mr. Pendleton to annex 3 feet of common ground, we set a precedent. We invite anarchy. That is why the board is asking for a special vote tonight to authorize legal foreclosure proceedings to recover the cost of removing this encroachment." A murmur went through the crowd. Foreclosure was a nuclear option. Neighbors glanced at Arthur, who sat in the front row, his leather folder resting on his knees. "All those in favor of authorizing the legal fund?" Brenda asked, raising her hand. "Point of order," Arthur said. He didn't shout, but his voice cut through the murmur. He stood up. Brenda glared down at him. "We are in the middle of a vote, Arthur. You had your chance to comply." Article 9, Section 3 of the bylaws, Arthur recited from memory. "Any member subject to a punitive vote has the right to present a defense prior to the balloting. I am exercising that right." He turned to the crowd. "I have prepared a short presentation. It will take 5 minutes. If you still want to take my house after that, I won't stop you." The crowd quieted. The curiosity was palpable. Jerry, the treasurer, leaned over and whispered to Brenda. She stiffened, then stepped back from the podium. "Make it quick." Arthur walked to the AV cart. He unplugged the board's laptop and connected his own. The screen flickered, then displayed a crisp, high-definition topographic map of the entire neighborhood. "This," Arthur began, using a laser pointer, "is the county tax map that the board has been using. Note the red lines." He clicked a button. "And this is the layout of the iron pins buried in the ground, verified by a licensed survey this week." On the screen, a new set of blue lines appeared. They were offset from the red lines. "There is a discrepancy of 3.2 feet, Arthur explained, his tone clinical. "A digital error from the county archives. The board believes the red line is real. The law states the blue line is real." He zoomed in on his own lot. "As you can see, my fence is inside the blue line. I am not encroaching." "That's just your opinion," Brenda shouted from the side. "It is the opinion of the State Board of Licensure," Arthur corrected. "But let's assume for a moment that Brenda is right. Let's assume the red line, the map Brenda is using to sue me, is the correct one." He clicked the remote. The map panned across the neighborhood, moving away from his house and settling on the building they were currently sitting in. "If the red line is correct," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a hush, "then the entire map shifts south." He overlaid the environmental easement zone he had measured that morning. A bright yellow hazard zone appeared on the screen. "This is the federally protected wetland buffer," Arthur said. The audience gasped. On the screen, the yellow zone completely swallowed the community pool and the back half of the clubhouse patio. "If Brenda's map is right," Arthur continued, turning to look directly at the board, "then this building and that pool are illegal structures built inside a conservation easement. We are currently in violation of the Clean Water Act. The room went deadly silent. So, Arthur said, disconnecting his laptop and picking up his folder. You have a choice. You can acknowledge the blue line, which means my fence stays up and the pool is legal. Or you can vote for the red line, sue me, and I will be forced to report the pool violation to the EPA tomorrow morning. The fines for that will likely bankrupt the association. He looked at the stunned faces of the homeowners. If Brenda is right about my fence, she has effectively ordered the demolition of your swimming pool. I leave it to the membership to decide which map you prefer. Arthur sat down. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the noise started. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was an uproar. People were standing up, shouting not at Arthur, but at the stage. Brenda stood frozen at the podium, her mouth slightly open, watching her authority evaporate in the heat of 100 angry questions. She looked at the screen, then at Arthur. She realized too late that she hadn't been fighting a homeowner. She had been fighting a cartographer, and he had just redrawn the world beneath her feet. The silence that followed Arthur's presentation didn't last long. It was broken by Holloway, the HOA's attorney, who had been sitting quietly in the back row. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked briskly to the stage, bypassing the stairs and stepping up onto the platform with a sense of urgent necessity. He placed a hand over the microphone, leaning in to whisper something into Brenda's ear. The audience couldn't hear the words, but they saw the color drain from Brenda's face. She looked like a general who had just been informed that her own artillery was pointed at her command post. The board will take a 10-minute recess, Holloway announced to the room, his voice tight. We need to confer on technical matters. No recess, shouted Mrs. Gable from the third row. Vote. I move for a vote of no confidence in the president. Seconded, yelled Dave's former demolition partner, who was oddly enough a resident of the neighborhood. The parliamentary procedure that followed was brutal and swift. The homeowners, tired of the fines, the policing of trash can placement, and now the revelation that their community assets were under threat of federal demolition due to incompetence, voted with a vengeance. By 8:15 p.m., Brenda Miller had been stripped of her title. Jerry, the terrified treasurer, was appointed interim president. His first act was to invite Arthur into the back office. The meeting was short. Holloway sat across from Arthur, no longer posturing as the aggressive litigator. He looked tired. He knew that if Arthur made that call to the EPA, or if he filed a countersuit for the title slander regarding the map shift, the legal fees would consume the association's reserves in a month. What do you want, Mr. Pendleton? Holloway asked, his pen hovering over a legal pad. Arthur didn't gloat. He didn't ask for the moon. He just wanted the math to be right. First, Arthur said, sliding a document across the desk, I want the board to sign this boundary line agreement. It formally recognizes the 1988 iron pins and the recent certified survey as the sole governing authority for Lot 44. It acknowledges that my fence is compliant and will remain compliant in perpetuity. Done, Holloway said. Second, Arthur continued, I want full reimbursement for the survey costs, the legal consultation I had to pay for, and a consulting fee for my time in correcting your map errors. I bill at $200 an hour. I have logged 40 hours. Jerry choked on his water. $8,000? Plus expenses? Cheaper than moving a swimming pool, Jerry, Arthur said softly. Holloway nodded. We will cut the check. And finally, Arthur said, closing his folder, I want a formal retraction of the violation notice sent to every resident who received the meeting agenda, stating that the board was in error. That's humiliating for the board, Jerry protested. Arthur looked him in the eye. Accuracy often hurts when you have been wrong for a long time. Those are the terms. They signed. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood was quiet. The humidity had broken, leaving the air crisp and clear. Arthur stood on his front porch, the morning coffee warm in his hands. Across the street, a for sale sign had appeared on Brenda's lawn. She hadn't been seen walking the neighborhood since the assembly. The shame of the public undressing of her authority, combined with the new board's decision to audit her previous beautification spending, had seemingly prompted a sudden desire to relocate. Arthur walked down his driveway. He stopped at the edge of the grass where the neon orange spray paint had finally faded away. He looked at his cedar fence, standing straight and true, protecting his hydrangeas. He walked to the corner of the lot, checking the ground. The grass had grown over the spot where he had dug up the iron pin, concealing the metal truth once again. The lines were invisible to the naked eye, but they were there. They were recorded. They were safe. A landscaping truck drove by, not Dave's, but a reputable company. The driver waved. Arthur waved back. He turned and looked at his house. It wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a fortress of verified coordinates. He took a sip of his coffee. The coffee tasted better today. Order, Arthur whispered to himself. He went inside and locked the door.